Can you hear me? Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here. Martin, thank you very much. And thanks to Martin and his wonderful team for the program that they've put together. Huh? Very good job. Congratulations to you all. Okay. So, before I start into this thing, Martin, you made me happy because I couldn't understand any of the German that was going on, but you used the word sexy. So I'm assuming that you were intending to describe me. So thank you very much for starting my day in a good way. Okay. Right. So I'm going to talk about things in three aspects. One, giving a little bit of an overview on retail from the US and just some thoughts on it. Then touch upon megatrends, and then talk about some leadership challenges, okay, that we want to consider. Okay. But before we get into that, if I could ask, just so I understand, people who are involved in retail, can you just indicate your hand so I get a count? Okay. And e-commerce in particular, physical store, interested in change management, big data? Okay. So we will try to cover a little bit of each, but it's good to know that that's the interest area. Okay. So let's start off at the very beginning with Maslow. Okay. So by the way, I will just want to mention there are going to be a couple of questions that I will need your help in because of its cultural change. I'm coming here from the US, so maybe there's a little bit of a gap. And I will check and I will ask you if it translates or not. And at the end, I will also ask you, there'll be a little quiz at the end, but I will ask you to do something towards the end. So Maslow, he talked about customers. He talked about the actualization and how people are thinking. And the psychology of needs that he came up with has been there from the 30s to now. Before coming here, I did a survey. I asked my family and others, and they suggested that we should add this to the new environment. Okay. Right. Customers are behaving and engaging differently, right? But customers have complaints, right? And they can voice it. And if you can understand this is a cultural issue, dear customer service. First of all, you should know I'm typing this with my middle finger. Okay. Now, customers have stress points, okay? And we have to understand that. And if you don't deal with that, there are going to be challenges. Not only on the customer side, but on the business side, there are issues. Because customers know when we don't listen to them. Okay? And here we say the customers aren't getting the message, folks. We need to communicate louder. And the answer from internal is, why don't we try listening to them for a change? And then management or someone comes back and says, what does that have to do with communication? Okay. So we are in trouble. Retail, in the US at least, is in turmoil. Okay? So this is a sum of some of the store closings. It's about 4,000 store closings here in the last 12, 14, 15 months. These are not moves of stores from one location to the other, but closings. The ones in red, Sports Authority, Aeropostale, Wet Seal, Sports Chalet, Radio Shack, and Circuit City, these are closures. So bankruptcy, Chapter 7, liquidation, okay, and some Chapter 11. Not just the stores, but also the malls are at risk in the US. There's about 1,100 malls in the US, and out of them, about 15%, the A++ store departments are fine, but it's the B and the C/D malls which are at risk. Probably about 15% of the count in the US are struggling or have challenges. Okay. In the US economy, it's an $18.6 trillion economy. Out of that, retail is $4.2 trillion. Out of the $4.2 trillion in retail, about 13 to 14% is online e-commerce. Last Thanksgiving was where Black Friday takes place, was an interesting cusp because that was the first time that you had more online visitors than people shopping in stores, 103 million to 102 million. Okay? And also at Thanksgiving, you saw a high water mark in terms of the percentage of transactions or sales that were online. 37% of sales in that period were online transactions. So whereas currently 13 to 14% is the norm, you can see that there's a high water mark that it could go up to 37% in the high 30s, okay, as part of consumer behavior, and you can anticipate move towards that. So this lends urgency to understanding what are sea changes going on that affect consumer behavior that are going to be impacting us in retail and in organizations that we need to prepare ourselves for. And by a sea change, I mean a disruption of such proportion that you can't really fight it by saying, oh, we'll just make a group which will do something differently. And this is not isolated in the US, it's not isolated in Europe. These are things that are happening in different parts. And what I'll touch upon there is how then we should take those and pose those into challenges for ourselves. Okay. So I'll start off with a little bit of what we want to do as goals in our company. We want to support our teams, we want to fend off competition, and we want to nurture and grow the company, okay? And before I go into the megatrend part, what I did was I spoke with friends that I know in the industry, and I got a couple of quotes to see what they thought of the situation, okay? So the first one is Henry Kravis, who's a CEO, a co-founder of KKR. You may be familiar with them, one of the largest private equity funds in the world. And he said to me that you can put this down, retail still has opportunities everywhere. But he says apply the financial lens dispassionately, be user-friendly, and anticipate customer needs. And then he said, oh, by the way, make sure you consider embracing cross-channel influence. Not a replacement, but influence. Blake Nordstrom, who I had the pleasure to speak with a couple of weeks ago, there's a hockey stick of change. We have to adapt to change faster than ever, and there is no luxury in terms of time. And from Google, the head of US sales, John McAteer, is a smart guy. Use metrics to measure on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to run your business, to better understand store traffic, web traffic, and overall share of consumer voice. Okay? And there's another person that I didn't put down on here, Ben Bernanke, who was the chairman of the US Federal Reserve. He said to me, I met him at a conference, and he said to me, 15, 20 years ago, whenever there was a change, we would just look to the numbers from Walmart. And we would use that as a bellwether guide. So if it went down, we would say, okay, that's generally what's going to be happening to the economy. And if it goes up, that's what will be happening. But he says that doesn't happen anymore now. It's different. So in the recent recent change of the downturn, when, for example, with the oil price, when the oil prices went down and you had more money in consumers' wallets, in the US, that additional money was not spent back on discretionary, but it went to, we did an analysis of this thing, to food and beverage, into electronics, into health and wellness, which, if you break it down, probably goes into electronics part again, not just the shoes, running shoes, and activities like that. So we see that consumers are behaving and engaging differently. So these are the challenges, if you will, that we surround ourselves with, okay? So let me get into what I put up as megatrends, okay? And these are positional statements. These are not absolute, but this is sort of a take as to some very big changes that are happening that we need to adapt ourselves to, okay? Right. So the first one is on the payments process, open payments, okay? So in the EU, EU is ahead of other parts of the world in this with the EU Payments Directive, which you may be familiar with. The last revision of that rulemaking happened in October. And basically the concept is that transaction information opens up as a pathway. So traditional transactions, you pay cash, you pay tender, you take the product and you leave, right? Whether you pay with credit card or with cash. That's this middle part here. And this is the traditional. And you have the stacks You have the physical, then you have the cards, and then you have different types of methods coming up now. That's a traditional core. Okay? Within that, I'll give you an example, even with Venmo, even within that traditional core. So I was visiting my daughter at university. I took her and her roommate out for a brunch. It was very nice. I paid with my credit card. The roommate said, no, can I chip in or something? No. I said, no, I will take care of it. You're our guest. So we went back. She left, and my daughter then picks up her phone 5 minutes later. Oh, no. She sent me a Venmo transfer for $20. And then my daughter says, I can't take this. I send it back to her through another transfer. So you can see even the traditional payment part is spilling over into the digital engagement, you see, which may not be impacting our lives, but sure as heck is impacting millennials and the younger generation. Okay? That's just the core part. Now let's think about this transaction process opening up and what the promise of this is. Now for some larger companies, it may sound a little scary or of concern, but it really will not be, and let me explain why. So imagine I'm going to, let me explain, I'll take an example of my buying, let's say, a TV set, okay? I'm gonna buy a big screen TV, and I have some discovery and some engagement process, and let's pick it up at the visit. So I have a tag that I've picked up, and that information now is being recorded, right? That I've picked up this TV, and I'm going to be going on towards a transaction for it. Imagine if that data were immediately available to some credit sources, perhaps my credit card provider, maybe other lenders, who can see my intent to purchase in the process of shopping. So open transactions promise, and this is encapsulated in the EU rulemaking already, allows for transparency and sharing of that data, okay, with other parties, so that I could then get a credit line increase offer to finance that big ticket purchase while I'm in the process of shopping. Does that make sense? Right? Do you see what sort of benefit there could be for consumers if you have the opportunity for competition at that customer touch point for that transaction? Going beyond the closed system of just keeping that information to one company or entity, right? On the other side of it, think about factoring. So the providers of that product, right, if they could be extended terms which are favorable because the lender, again, a bank or some other financing entity, sees that the product from this manufacturer or this provider is on a roll, right? And where will that be relevant? You can see that could be relevant for manufacturers and suppliers, right? But in the future, we're talking about share and maker economies. If you're familiar with those terms, those are going to be smaller manufacturers. So you have Etsy and other websites which have fairly decent scale in the US now, where localized producers, small volume producers, are providing items that are selling on marketplaces, okay? So they have a very hard time getting financing because it's a big task for them to package all the information, get their financials together, especially if they're making it out of home or they're making it in South America or in Africa or in Asia, to take that information out and go to a bank and ask for a line of credit. It's very hard for them. But if you have an open payment process where that transaction information is being shared out, then you have the opportunity for factoring, and the benefits to those manufacturers would be very high. Does that make sense? Right? Now you can go further down the line. Now I have the purchase, and we talked about Venmo, PayPal, so you can see this whole stack. And of course, within that, the POS systems are transitioning. They're going from physical POS to tablet-based transactions to cloud-based, virtualized transactions, and then, of course, NFC and other types of things. And these cause problems from the retailer side, but they're great for the customer. Let's move on to the transaction having taken place. I've bought the TV. Now there should be competition for how this gets delivered to my home, when it gets delivered. Is somebody going to offer me white glove service and install it at the time I want, so there could be competition at that point, you see? And then you have further things. So what's the whole point of all of this? The whole point of all of this is customer benefit through and through. And in my mind, this is the Amazon fighter. Does that make sense? Because you're allowing competition at every customer touch point. And you're allowing for innovation at every customer touch point within a secure framework, as provided by the EU, for example. And it's happening in the US now with the FCC opening up the cable top boxes. So this, in my opinion, is going to be one of the biggest changes to the transaction environment. And I believe this plays in favor of physical stores in a very interesting way. That's the first megatrend. The second one is convergence of commerce. And by convergence of commerce, this is not as pretty as the other one. Is we have customers transacting with us, interacting with retail and e-commerce through store visit, through e-commerce on tablet, mobile, or desktop, or through customer service environments. And customers are comfortable with that. Their engagement is taking place on the front end. But the challenge here for the convergence of commerce is with the corporations, with the companies on our side. Because our systems are really not up to date, and we have cobbled pieces which have to be sort of glued together with ETL data transfers or batch processes, and those have to get modernized or structured in such a way that they try to match up with the front end, at the front end with the customer point of view. You can't have too many systems at the front end. So here I've put the OMS, an order management system, and CRM as the lead components, whereas OMS would probably have been related just to customer service and been in the back, and maybe master data management or inventory transparency would have been higher. But I think there's an opportunity for organizations, both in the retail physical infrastructure, as well as the customers, to have more of a meeting point. Does that make sense? Okay. And this is going to be a continuing internal challenge, and you have to have ways of doing it that are reasonable for both your investment, financial ROI point of view, as well as completing the task in terms of meeting the needs of the consumer. The third megatrend, I refer to as 3 terms: fun, frictionless, and financially sound, is how you go about growing business value. And this is not necessarily different, but it's perhaps focusing more in a laser-like manner between, let's say, for example, the COO, the CMO, and the CFO, aligned together in a laser-like way to look at engagement, make the experience easy, and to drive costs down and impact EBIT. Because customer engagement is tied to enterprise value and shareholder value. Okay? So basically, keep the customer at the heart of all decisions. Okay? But is this all just talk? How do you convert it to action? So I'd like to go through a small case study on big data, of how you boil some of that down, that was done, and then go into leadership. Okay. So how do you go from big data to decisions, right? Sea of data, lots of stuff going on. How do you convert it into decision-making, actionable pieces? So a problem statement is on promotion effectiveness. This is the area we chose to look at. Up to 30% of revenues may be driven by promotions for a retailer, and marketing and markdown costs for the company may be up to 15% of revenue. And the campaigns will be set up between print, direct, online, TV, and others. And the channels compete for the resources. Okay? So I did this discussion at an analyst meeting in New York, a group of analysts and mutual fund investors and hedge funds, which asked me, well, what should we ask management, right? What are the questions we should pose to them? Because they're interested in finding out, is there alignment? Are these companies doing well or not? Well, the important thing is we understand that the effectiveness of campaigns overall is there. If you talk to C-level people, they understand that. Okay? But the effectiveness of specific campaigns is unclear. And the impact on ROI per department, per promotion, or specific customer offer is disputed. There's lack of clarity and lack of measurement on that. So they asked me, is that the question that we should ask them? Because I said that's the challenge. But I said to them, no, that's not the question you want to ask them. Because if you ask that question, there's going to be you're not going to get a no answer from anyone. They're all going to say, of course it is, and you will not have gotten the information you want. We said that what you should ask is, how do you measure the effectiveness of campaigns and offers such that you can continuously improve your marketing effectiveness and EBITDA contribution? And if you ask that question on a measurable basis, just the way John posed it from Google earlier, then you get either consistent answers from management all the way down into the trenches, or you have disconnects and you know where to intervene and you know where to ask the questions. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is a dashboard showing 52 weeks, a year of marketing results. At the top, the projections, this is really what you bought, what you sold, and how much money you made. Okay? And this is probably about 1 billion records that was boiled down into this particular way of showing it, where we're looking at the gaps between them are what instruct us. So here, the projections are what we purchased, then what was sold, and what the profit was. So campaign effectiveness can be measured, and the way we did it was looking at incremental ROI and saying that incremental ROI is the key figure to watch, not the average, okay, but what you gain from each dollar or euro that you invested and what you got back incrementally, so that if I didn't do the promotion or I didn't do that activity, what would the baseline sales have been, estimating that, and then from there calculating what the lift was to go and relate each investment dollar you make to each incremental. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. So what we ended up doing in this case, we built a system which ended up with a data cube, if you will. So it was very consistent all the way through, from the C-level, merchandising, marketing, and individual actions. And the reporting can be as granular as you want. Okay? So this is in use now at Hudson's Bay. Hudson's Bay at Canada, specifically the Canada division, they had numbers which for physical retail are very good. Internet is different. But they've had 4 years of about 5% compounded same-store sales growth. That means sales per square foot is what's going up. So their benchmark was 100 in 2011, 2015. In their most recent annual report, they indicated that the index was 119.5, so 19.5% compounded same-store square foot sales growth. Okay. Let me move to now next step, the leadership points that I wanted to allude to. Now, you're all executives in charge of companies or divisions or groups, and you have challenges ahead of you, right? And I wanted to pose a couple of thoughts, 3 different thoughts for you. First, there is no silver bullet in an action you take. You know, I often get asked, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of different transactions and companies. Recent one we worked on was when PetSmart was sold, went private at $8.76 billion, brought out by a private equity group, and we advised management, work with them, with Panasonic, who we are advising on US strategy, with Toys R Us, Babies R Us, when they were bought by KKR and they went into shared services model. And you know, all the way through, it's always about tacking. It's always about checking what you have to do, putting a foot forward, and then stepping back and seeing, is there any good benefit coming from that? And sometimes I get asked, you know, don't tell me about it. I always go in and say, tell me what the situation is. And sometimes I get the reply, don't worry about what the situation is now. It may be messy, we acknowledge that. Just tell me where we need to be at. Describe the B for me. We're at A now, we need to go to B. But there's a problem with just describing the B. Look, I'm 5'6". For me to reach up to 7 feet is possible, but if the target is 8 feet, it's not possible for me to read that, right? Somebody who is 6.5 feet tall, Martin, for you it's much easier to do that. It's not a challenge for you. So the path that you have to take to go from A to B is going to be unique and different regardless of whether the objective is the same for the companies. Does that make sense? Right? So we have to be thoughtful And we have to really understand what I call the rock face of reality, of where we're starting out from, what resources we have, what skills we have, what our past experience is, what my team is capable of doing. If I don't understand that, I can't move forward in a successful way without incurring great risk. Okay? So a quote from Martin Luther King, keep moving forward, never stop. The second one is be selective. Curate your tasks. Whether you're talking about people, whether you're talking about ROI, whether you're talking about the process you have, we have information overload and task overload, and people saying, why not? Because the competition is doing it or somebody else is doing it. And if you go down the path where we follow what others are doing, what the masses are doing, it can cause trouble for us. Before, there was too little information. Now there's too much. And when you have, I had an incident, a friend of mine, Sharon, who is the president of stores for a major retailer in the US, I had an appointment to meet her in Dallas. And she had said, I welcome you to come over here and meet. And then I got a call the day before saying, I'm sorry, I can't meet you, but we could have a call. So I got on the call with her, and I said, I was thinking, oh my God, I'm getting blown off. And I was a little bit, pensive about it, right? And she said, I'm sorry, Shah, I can't meet you because, next Monday, this is on a Wednesday, next Monday, I'm giving my first statement to my people, to my staff. And I've taken the next 2 days off to stay at home and just craft that message. Mark Twain said, in a letter, paraphrasing him, I'm sorry I have to write you a 2-page letter because I didn't have enough time to take it down to 2 paragraphs. So the messages that we give to people are extremely important, and we have to curate what we say so we don't have a lot of extra noise going through. And it's the same thing. It's not just with the people, but it's with your other activities that you have, whether you're doing financial activities, which is where zero-based budgeting, as practiced by 3G and Berkshire Hathaway and other companies are concerned. You curate and you think about the benefit that's going to come out before you launch. This one was one of the cultural ones. You have to tell me if this makes sense or not. Be careful when you blindly follow the masses, because sometimes the M is silent. Yes, we got that? Just kidding. Okay. And the third one, probably the most important one, keep the customer at the heart of decisions. We had some jokes at the beginning about customer service. We talked about the 3 megatrends, and we talked about being selective. But we have to keep customers at the heart, and it's not just something you say and you check off, but you incorporate. Steve Jobs, customers don't measure you on how hard you tried. They measure you on what you deliver. So I put these 3 next steps up. And the reason I had Steve Jobs noted there was not just because he built a great company, which he did, or had great products, but he actually lived each of these components, these beliefs, these foundational pieces. There was no silver bullet, right? How many iterations do you know of the Mac, of the iPod, of the iPhone? You iterate, you tack, you try. This is the concept that's prevalent in Silicon Valley. Okay? Be selective. When he focused on his teams, it was, these are the people who are going to work on it. These are my chosen crew that's going to be committed totally to it. So you have to be also thoughtful about curating the people that you assign to do tasks and resources and the projects you take on. And of course, keeping the customer at the heart of decisions. So if I can, in closing, ask you to think of one thing that you could go back and do, or one step that you could take, which allows you to be better for yourself, or your people, or your family. Start with one basic step, and then you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much.